She slid the paper across the kitchen table and tapped it twice with one manicured nail. Sign at the little flag. Nora, it is just a formality. 9 years. 9 years I had bathed, fed, and medicated a woman who was not my mother, and I was never once paid a single dollar for it. Here is the part my sister-in-law did not know I would one day be able to prove. That same winter, while she slid that paper toward me across the placemat, there were 3 documents inside that house, with my handwriting on every page of the care, and 1 document with my name forged at the bottom of it. I walked out of that kitchen with a blue spiral notebook and a brass key on a green ribbon. Nothing else. I wanted everything they thought I would never get back. Today, I read records for a living. I am a forensic medical records auditor. I find the lies people bury inside paperwork. The note, written after the fact. The signature dated to a day. The patient was unconscious. The assessment built to make a good person look like a bad one. I have caught careful, calm people who thought paper was on their side. Last winter, I finally opened the file my own family had built against me. I read every page of it out loud to the people who could actually do something, and then, lawfully, on the record, I made each falsified page cost them to the dollar. I never raised my voice. Once, if you have ever been the one the whole family leaned on and then counted as nothing. Stay with me tonight. I'm going to show you how the quietest person in the room ended up holding the only thing that mattered. My name is Nora Vance, and I was 46. The winter I stopped being invisible. Welcome back to Still Waters, the channel where the people who got overlooked finally get the last quiet word, and where the receipts do the talking, instead of the volume. If a family ever decided who you were and then handed you the bill for it, you already know exactly what this story is. Settle in, drop a comment and subscribe, and let me start where it actually started, which is not at the beginning. It is near the end, on a Tuesday in February, at a kitchen table on Linden Street. Let me take you to that table. It was a little after 4 in the afternoon. I know that, because the kettle had just gone quiet on the stove. Meg always had her tea at 4. 9 years of 4 o'clock tea, and even with everything else falling apart, I had still made it. Because routine was the last thing dementia takes, and the first thing it gives back to you when nothing else works. Meg's cup was already cooling on the tray. The hand cream was on the counter, the lavender kind, because I rubbed it into her knuckles every evening for the arthritis, and her hands were the softest part of a hard life. Vivian sat across from me in her good coat, the one she wore when she wanted you to feel underdressed in your own home. She had a leather folder. She had her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and she had that small, sad, patient smile she used right before she took something from you. Sign at the little flag, she said again. It just moves Mom's care decisions to me officially. You've done so much. You shouldn't have to carry all of this anymore. I want you to hear how kind that sounded. That is the thing about the people who do real damage to a family. They almost never shout. They are concerned. They are responsible. They use the word Mom like a key that opens any door. Vivian had been telling people for years that she was the responsible one. Someone has to be the responsible one, Nora, she would say, usually right after she had volunteered my evenings, my weekends, my entire life, for a job she was being paid to oversee, and I was not being paid to do. I did not sign it that day. I told her I wanted to read it first. You would think a person with nothing to hide would have liked that answer. Her smile did not move, but something behind it did. Of course, she said. Take your time. And she slid the folder back into her bag and clicked it shut. And I knew, the way you know weather, that I had just made an enemy out of a woman who had only ever needed me to be furniture. That detail matters later. Hold on to it. To understand why a stranger's mother became my whole life, you have to understand how it happened. And it did not happen all at once. Nobody ever asks you to give up 9 years on a single afternoon. They ask you for a Saturday. Then they ask you for the Saturday after that. I married Theo Vance when I was 35. Theo was gentle and easy to love and constitutionally unable to stand in a doorway and tell his older sister no. His mother, Margaret, who everyone called Meg, was already starting to forget the small things then, where the keys were, whether she had eaten, the year. Vivian, Theo's sister, was 11 years older, and she had appointed herself the manager of the family, the way some people appoint themselves to a throne, quietly, and then act offended when you notice the crown. The first ask was small. Could I sit with Meg on Tuesdays? While Vivian had her hair done, I liked Meg. I said yes. The second ask was not an ask. Vivian simply stopped showing up on Tuesdays, then Thursdays, then the in-between days, and the sitting with Meg became the watching of Meg, became the caring for. Meg became my second unpaid job. And then, when I cut my hours at the insurance office to manage it, my only job. Each step looked reasonable from inside it. That is how good people end up giving their lives away. Not in a decision, in a slope. Here is the part I did not see for years, because I was too tired to look. While I was learning to crush Meg's pills into applesauce and to talk her down from the bad afternoons, Vivian had quietly gone to the bank and to a lawyer, and had Meg sign a durable power of attorney, and name Vivian, the sole trustee of Meg's living trust. On paper, Vivian now controlled everything Meg owned. The house, on Linden Street, the accounts, have to, the decisions. And me, the woman doing every hour of the actual work, controlled nothing. Because nobody writes the unpaid daughter-in-law into anything. You are assumed. You are weather. Let me show you one afternoon. So the word weather stops being a figure of speech and becomes a thing that happened to me at a table. It was Thanksgiving. The 5th year. I had bathed Meg, dressed her, done her hair, packed her medications in a labeled case, and gotten her across town to Vivian's house on time. Which with a person in Meg's condition is its own small miracle. That nobody thanks you for. The house was full. 20-some relatives. The good china out. Kurt carving at the head of the table, like a man in a commercial. And when everyone sat down, there was no chair for me. I want to be precise, because Vivian was always precise. It was not an oversight. There were exactly enough chairs for the family. Meg had one, at Vivian's right hand, where the responsible daughter could be seen gently tending her in front of everyone. And I, the woman who had dressed Meg that morning and would undress her again that night, was waved toward the kitchen with a plate, the way you thank the caterer, and ask her to stay out of the photographs. You don't mind, do you, Nora? Vivian said, smiling, pitched so the whole table could hear it. You are so good with her. It is easier if you eat near the kitchen, in case she needs something. So good with her. That is a sentence you can wrap a chain around. I ate standing up near the sink, and I watched my mother-in-law be displayed at a table I was not allowed to sit at. And I said nothing, because I had already learned that correcting Vivian in front of an audience only handed her a stage. Theo caught my eye once across the room and gave me the apologetic half-smile I had stopped believing in years before. His sister meant well. The smile said, they always said that. A grown man, still translating his sister into someone kinder than she was. I cleared the plates that night. I drove Meg home, put her to bed, and worked the cream into her hands. And somewhere between that table and that bed, I stopped being angry, which is far more dangerous for a person like Vivian than any amount of yelling. Anger argues. Anger can be managed. What I became that night was something colder and more useful. I became a person who pays attention, and the more attention I paid, the more I saw that the kindness in that family flowed in exactly one direction, and the work flowed in exactly the other. And somewhere in the middle of those two currents, money was changing hands that I had never been allowed to see. Stay with me, because this is where it stops being sad and starts being a crime. About 4 years into it, Meg gave me something. It was one of her clear afternoons, the kind that got rarer every season, where the fog lifted and my Meg was just there, herself, holding my hand. She took a brass key off her own ring, an old door key worn smooth, and she tied it to a length of green ribbon she cut from a spool in the sewing drawer, and she pressed it into my palm. This house is going to be yours someday, she said. You are the only one who ever actually lives in it. With me, the others just visit it like a grave. She closed my fingers over the key. Don't let Vivian tell you different. I laughed and told her not to talk like that, but I kept the key. I want you to remember that key, because 3 years later, a piece of paper tried to make it a lie. And what that paper said about Meg's wishes was the cruelest forgery of all. Crueler than the money. And I will get to it. The money came first. I found out about the money by accident, which is the only way I ever found out anything in that family. Because the group chat I was the subject of was not a group chat I was in. Theo got the bank statements forwarded to him because his name was on a small joint account for Meg's groceries. One night, he left his tablet on the kitchen counter, open, and I was wiping it down, and I saw the trust account summary, and I saw a recurring withdrawal, $2,400 every month. The memo line on every single one read the same way. Caregiver, compensation. V. Saute, Halloran. V. S. Halloran. Vivian, paying herself $2,400 a month out of Meg's own money as the caregiver, while I, the actual caregiver, slept in 2-hour stretches and learned to change an adult brief at 3 a.m. and got nothing. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I did not cry. I want to be honest with you about that, because this is the part of these stories where the narrator usually weeps, and I did not. Not then. I just sat on the cold tile and did the arithmetic, because arithmetic is what I do when the world tilts. $2,400 a month. I counted back through the statements. Theo had 51 months. 2,400 times 51. I did it in my head, and then I did it again, on the back of an envelope to be sure. $122,400. She had paid herself $122,400 to care for a woman she had not bathed once. If you have ever discovered, all at once, the exact price someone put on your invisibility, you know the strange calm that comes after the math. It is not peace. It is the opposite of peace. It is the moment the floor becomes solid under you again. Because now, at least you know where you are standing. I did not confront her. Write that down somewhere. I did not confront her, because I had learned something in 9 years of watching Vivian operate. And it is the most useful thing I know. You never let the careful ones know. You can count. Instead, I started keeping a notebook. It was a cheap blue spiral notebook from the pharmacy, the kind you buy for a child's homework. I had actually started it years earlier, for an innocent reason, to track Meg's medications, so I would not double a dose on a bad night. But after the kitchen floor, the notebook became something else. Every day, I wrote down what I actually did, the time I gave each pill, and which one, what Meg ate, and whether she kept it down, every appointment, every fall, every good afternoon, and every bad night. I wrote it in ink, in order, dated, and I never tore out a page. I did not know yet why I was doing it. I only knew, in my bones, the thing an old supervisor told me back when I was a clerk, and barely knew what I was doing. Paper outlives people. Write the truth down, and it waits for you. That blue notebook waited almost 3 years. Now I have to tell you about the one person in all of this who saw me, because there was one. Her name was Ruth, and she was the hospice social worker the county sent around when Meg's decline reached the stage with a name on it. Ruth was somewhere past 60, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a way of sitting in a room without trying to run it, which made her the rarest person I had met in years. She did not come to fix me. She came once a week, drank the bad coffee, and watched. One evening she watched me do the thing I did every night without thinking, sit on the edge of Meg's bed, and work the lavender cream into those ruined knuckles. One finger at a time. While Meg hummed at the ceiling, Ruth watched the whole ritual. She did not say anything wise. She did not tell me I was a saint, which is what people say when they want to be excused from helping. When I walked her to her car, she stopped with her hand on the door and looked at me for a long moment. "They'll never pay you for that," she said, nodding back at the house. "And that is exactly why it counts. Love doesn't bill by the hour." That was all. She got in her car and drove off into the dark, and I stood in the driveway, and I have carried that one sentence every day since. Love doesn't bill by the hour. It became the thing I held against the version of me that Vivian was building in paper. The neglectful one. The one who could not be trusted, because I knew, no matter what any document said, exactly how many hours I had given, and exactly why I had never sent a bill. Here is what Vivian built, while I rubbed cream into an old woman's hands. She hired a man, a geriatric care manager with a website and a clipboard, named in the paperwork as a consultant. He came to the house twice, total both times when I was out at the pharmacy, which I learned later was not an accident, because Vivian had timed it. And he wrote an assessment, a formal-looking, 11-page geriatric care assessment, on letterhead, dated the 3rd week of October. It described a household where the primary caregiver, me, was providing, and I am quoting the phrase that I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. Inconsistent and possibly neglectful daily care. It said, Meg was unsafe in my hands. It recommended immediate placement in a memory care facility. It named the facility Marsh Hollow Memory Care, and Marsh Hollow Memory Care, I would learn, was a place in which Vivian's husband Kurt Halloran held a quiet, undisclosed ownership stake. Let that sit for a second. The woman draining the trust paid a consultant to declare the unpaid caregiver dangerous. In order to move the patient into a facility her own husband secretly profited from, which would then bill that same trust every month for the rest of Meg's life. It was not cruelty. For its own sake, I need you to understand that, because the villains in real life are almost never cartoons. Vivian was not twirling a mustache. Vivian had a logic. In her mind, she was the responsible one, the one who handled things, and handling things meant the money flowed toward Vivian, and the work flowed toward Nora. And the paper made it all look correct. The cruelty was just a byproduct of the bookkeeping. That is what makes it a system instead of a tantrum. And a system is so much harder to fight, because a system has letterhead. The day the assessment landed, Vivian called a family meeting, not with me, about me. I found out it had happened the way I found out everything. Secondhand, from the one cousin who was decent to me. A younger woman named Priya, who was married into the family. The same way I was, and had learned the same lessons about where she ranked. Priya texted me a screenshot. The family chat, the one I was not in, was busy deciding I was a danger. There was the assessment, photographed, and shared. There were the relatives I had cooked for, lined up agreeing. Such a shame. We should have stepped in sooner. Poor Meg. All those years with someone who wasn't really up to it. Not one of them had spent a night there. Not one of them had ever crushed a pill or changed a sheet at 4 a.m. But the paper said I was neglectful, and paper, in that family, was permission. That was the winter Vivian slid the document across my kitchen table, the one that just moved Mom's care decisions to her officially. I understand now what I was actually being asked to sign. It was my own removal. My signature would have made the whole thing clean. It would have made me complicit in declaring myself unfit. And it would have closed the door behind Meg as the orderlies from Marsh Hollow carried her bag out to the van. I did not sign it. And 4 days later, while I was at the pharmacy, they came and they took her anyway. I have reconstructed that hour many times since, the way I reconstruct everything now. Out of evidence instead of feeling. I left for the pharmacy at 2:15 in the afternoon because Meg's prescription was ready, and that pharmacy closed early on Saturdays. And I know now that Vivian knew the pharmacy's Saturday hours. Because Vivian always knew exactly enough to be standing somewhere. I was not. A neighbor told me the rest. His name was Walt. An older man who sat on his front porch in every kind of weather and missed nothing on that street. A white van from Marsh Hollow pulled up at 2:40. Vivian's car was already in the drive. 2 attendants went inside. They were not unkind, Walt said, but they were fast. The way people are fast when they have been told to be in and out before someone gets home. They wheeled Meg out with a single packed bag, and Meg was asking, over and over, where I was. Where is Nora? She'll want to know where I am. Where is Nora? And Vivian, Walt said, patted her mother's hand and told her, gently, for the benefit of any neighbor listening. Nora, can't take care of you anymore. Mom, we talked about this. We had not talked about this. There was no this. Except the one Vivian had built on letterhead. The van pulled away. At 2:55, I got home at 3:20. I had missed my own mother-in-law being carried out of her own house by 25 minutes. And I understand now that the 25 minutes were not luck. They were the plan. I came home to an empty house. The hospital bed was still there, stripped. The lavender cream was on the counter, where I'd left it. Meg's tea tray was in the drying rack, and on the kitchen table, where the folder had been, there was a single sheet of paper. A copy left for me, almost as a courtesy. And it was the cruelest document of all. It was the Second Amendment to the Margaret Halloran Revocable Living Trust. I will tell you what it said in a moment, and I will tell you the one detail on it that ended Vivian's whole career as the responsible one. But first, I have to tell you what I did next, because this is the part where I stopped being the woman they could erase. I sat in that empty house for a long time. And then, for the only time in this entire story, I cried, alone, at the kitchen table, with a copy of that amendment in front of me, and the green ribboned key in my pocket. I cried for about 4 minutes. I let myself. Then I wiped my face with a dish towel, and I picked up my blue notebook, and I made the decision that organized the next year of my life. I was not going to make a scene. I was going to make a case. Let me show you how a quiet person rebuilds, because this part went faster than you would think. And I am going to move quickly through it on purpose. The way it felt. I left Linden Street. I left Theo for a while too, not out of hate, but because a man who cannot stand in a doorway is a man who will keep apologizing for his sister while she robs you. And I did not have room for both a fight and a marriage. I rented a small apartment over a laundromat. I went back to the insurance office and asked for full time, and got it. And then I did the thing that changed everything, which was that I stopped being a clerk and decided to learn how the paper actually worked. I took night courses. I sat for certifications. I learned medical coding, then auditing, then the specific, beautiful, merciless discipline of forensic records review, which is the art of reading a chart, not for what it says, but for what it is trying to hide. I learned how a backdated note betrays itself, how a signature added later sits wrong on the page, how a care assessment built to lie always leaves a seam, because liars are lazy and the truth is patient. Within 2 years, I had a job doing it for real, on a fraud and integrity review team, reading the records of strangers, finding the falsified note that cost an insurer or a family or a dying patient everything. I was good at it. I was good at it because I had once been the falsified note. I knew exactly how it felt to be a person rewritten into a problem by someone with letterhead. I did not touch my own family's case for a long time. I want to be very clear about that, because it matters, and because the system only works if you respect it. I could not, and would not, investigate my own relatives at my own job. That is a conflict of interest. It would have been the kind of misconduct that gets a real auditor fired and makes the guilty party innocent. My competence was only ever going to be worth anything if it stayed clean, so I did it the right way, which is the slow way, on my own time, with my own copies, building the thing that any honest person could pick up and verify. I visited Meg. Marsh Hollow let family in, and I was still, on paper, family. She did not always know my name by then, but she knew my hands. She knew the lavender cream. I brought it every visit, and I worked it into those knuckles. 1 finger at a time, and on the good afternoon she would hum. And once, just once, she looked at me clear-eyed and said, "There is my girl who actually stays." And I had to go sit in my car for that one too. But I did not count that as a cry. That was something else. I want to tell you what those visits showed me, because it is part of how a system stays, standing long after the lie that built it should have fallen. Marsh Hollow was not a horror. It was worse than a horror, in a way, because a horror you can report. Marsh Hollow was simply thin. Thin on staff, thin on time, thin on the 100 tiny attentions that are the whole of decent care. The aides were kind and exhausted, and far too few. Nobody was rubbing cream into anybody's hands at the end of the day, and every month, like clockwork, an itemized invoice went from Marsh Hollow to Meg's trust, and the trust paid it, and a portion of every dollar of it found its way, through 3 quiet layers of ownership, back toward Vivian's husband. They had not moved Meg to keep her safe. They had moved her to convert her into a monthly payment, and they had needed me declared dangerous to do it. Because as long as I was in that house caring for her for free, there was no invoice. I was, it turned out, the only thing standing between that family and a revenue stream. That is the sentence I keep coming back to. I had not been a daughter-in-law to them, or even an employee. I had been a gap in the billing. If you have ever found out, years too late, that your love was a line item someone was working to delete, you know there is no clean word for what that does to you, so I did not look for one. I picked up a pen instead. And quietly, over those 2 years, I gathered, this is the evidence reveal. This is the high point. So let me slow down and lay it out the way I eventually laid it out on the conference table, because the order is the whole point. The first thing I pulled was the trust accounting. As a beneficiary named in the original trust, I had a legal right to demand a formal accounting from the trustee, and through an elder law attorney I had finally hired, a sharp, unhurried woman named Delphine Okafor. I demanded it. Vivian had to produce the records, and there it was, in her own bookkeeping. In black ink, she could not deny because she had written it herself. Caregiver. Compensation. Va. Halloran. $2,400 a month. 51 payments. $122,400. Paid by Vivian. To Vivian. For work Vivian did not do. That was page 1. Page 2 was the geriatric care assessment, the 11-page one. The inconsistent and possibly neglectful care. For 2 years, that document had defined me, and here is what I did with it. I laid it down on the table next to my blue spiral notebook, the cheap one from the pharmacy, and I went through them line by line, day by day. The same dates on both. The assessment said the caregiver was inconsistent with medications. My notebook had every dose, timed, dated, in my own hand. For 9 years. Never a gap. The assessment said the home was unsafe and the patient was undernourished. My notebook had every meal and Meg's weight. Tracked monthly, steady. The assessment was 11 pages, written by a man who had been in the house twice for a total of under an hour. My notebook was almost 3,000 entries, written by the woman who had been there every single day. One of those documents was paper pretending to be truth. The other was truth that had been waiting, patiently, in ink, exactly the way the old supervisor promised it would. That was page 2. And page 2 was the moment I knew I would win, because I was no longer the falsified note. I was the auditor, reading it. Page 3 was the kill shot. And it was a small thing, the way the things that bring down careful people always are. I went back to the Second Amendment, the cruel one. Let me finally tell you what it said. It removed the house on Linden Street, the house Meg had pressed a brass key into my hand and promised me, appraised at $310,000, from going where the original trust said it would go. And it redirected it entirely to Vivian. It also inserted language confirming that Vivian had appropriately compensated herself for caregiving. In other words, it was the forgery that made the theft legal. Signed. It claimed by Meg on the 9th of March, 2 years before. But I am a forensic records auditor, and the first thing you check on a contested document is not the signature. It is the notary. The amendment was notarized. The stamp belonged to a notary named Del Pruitt, who happened to be a teller at Meg's bank, a nice enough man Vivian had used for years, because he never asked questions. I pulled the public notary commission record, which anyone can do. It is a matter of public record. And I read the dates the way I read everything now, carefully. In order. Del Pruitt's notary commission had expired the previous November. The amendment was notarized the following March. 4 months after his authority to notarize anything had lapsed, which meant the notarization was void, which meant the amendment had never been properly executed at all, which meant the document that had stolen Meg's house and laundered Vivian's theft was, legally, a piece of paper with no more force than a grocery list. And there was more. Because once you pull one thread, the whole garment comes apart. I cross-referenced the date on the amendment, the 9th of March, against Meg's medical records, which as a longtime caregiver, I knew how to read. On the 9th of March, the day Meg supposedly sat down and clearly and willingly rewrote her trust to disinherit the only person who stayed. Meg had been admitted to the hospital with a urinary infection and an acute confusion episode. And the attending physician's own note assessed her as not oriented to time or place, lacking capacity to make financial decisions. So the forgery did not even have the decency to be careful. They had Meg signing away her house on a day she could not have told you the year. That was page 3. That was the day, the document, the notary, and the doctor's note, all in one stack, all verifiable by any honest stranger. And there was one more page. But it was not evidence in the legal sense. It was the warm one. I will keep it for the end, because it is the thing that turned a victory into a vindication. And it belongs there. Now, the reckoning. And I need you to notice how boring it is. Because that is the secret these stories almost never tell you. Real revenge, the kind that lasts, is not a scene. It is paperwork filed in the right order with the right office. And it is devastating precisely because there is nothing to argue with. I did not call Vivian. I did not post anything in any group chat. I did not show up at Marsh Hollow in a fury. I want you to picture, instead, what I actually did, because it is so much colder than shouting. Through my attorney, Delphine, I filed 3 things. In 3 places, on the same Monday morning. First, a petition in probate court to remove Vivian as trustee, to compel a full accounting, and to surcharge her for the misappropriated funds. The petition included the accounting, the notebook comparison, the expired notary record, and the hospital note. It asked the court to void the Second Amendment as improperly executed and signed without capacity. Second, a report to Adult Protective Services documenting suspected financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult by her fiduciary, with the same evidence attached. Third, a referral to the State Attorney General's office regarding the undisclosed ownership interest. Because a trustee steering a beneficiary into a facility she profits from is not just ugly. It is self-dealing. And there are people whose entire job is to care about that very much. Then I did the hardest thing, which was nothing. I let the system do its work, the way Ruth had taught me without ever saying it. The truth is patient. You write it down, and you let it wait. It did not wait long. Vivian found out the way the careful always find out. when an officer of the court hands them a stack of paper, and then she did exactly what I expected, which is that the comm cracked, and the responsible one came apart in stages, in voicemails, because she could not get me on the phone. The first voicemail was warm. "Nora, sweetheart, there has clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. Let's just talk." The second was wounded. "After everything I did for this family, I cannot believe you would weaponize a sad situation like this." The third dropped the mask entirely. "You ungrateful. Jumped up, little. Nobody. You were the help. You were always the help. You think a costume of a job makes you somebody." I saved all three. I did not answer any of them. I have learned that when the other person is shouting into a recording, the most powerful thing you can do is let the recording keep their voice exactly the way it really sounds. For later, there was one confrontation. I will not pretend there wasn't, but it was not the kind they wanted. Vivian, through her own lawyer, requested a settlement meeting before the probate hearing, hoping, I think, to charm or bully it back into the family and out of the public record. We met in a conference room with both attorneys present, and I did the only thing I have ever known how to do in a room like that. I did not argue. I informed. I slid 3 pages across the table, the way she had once slid one across mine. "1. I said, here is the trust. Accounting. $122,400. Paid by you to you. The court will be asking you to return it. 2. I laid down the assessment and the notebook, side by side. Here is the report that called me neglectful. Here is the daily record that disproves it on every line. One of these was written by someone who was in the house. You can decide which. 3. I laid down the amendment, the expired commission, and the hospital note. Here is the document that took the house. Here is the notary stamp that was already void when it was used. And here is the doctor saying Meg couldn't tell you what year it was. On the day she supposedly signed it, there is no version of this where that amendment survives. Vivian's lawyer had gone very quiet. Vivian had not. She started to rise, started to reach for the old reliable engine, the volume, the wronged matriarch performance, the everything I did for this family. I did not get louder. I have learned that when the other side starts to climb, you drop your voice until they have to stop and lean in to hear you. And the leaning in is the surrender. You told everyone for 9 years that someone had to be the responsible one. I said, quietly, and the room went quiet to catch it. You were right about that. It just was never going to be you. There was no triumph in saying it. There did not need to be. The triumph was already on the table in 3 pages, and the pages did not get tired, and they did not lie. Now, here is where these stories usually rush to the happy ending, and I am going to refuse it, because the real ending is better and truer than the one you are braced for. The court did its work. Slowly, the way courts do. Let me give you the consequences plainly, because you have earned them, and because Vivian earned them too. The probate judge voided the Second Amendment in full. Improper execution. Expired. Notary. No capacity. The house on Linden Street went back into Meg's estate. Exactly the way the original trust always intended. The judge ordered a full accounting and then surcharged Vivian, which is the law's flat, beautiful word for give it back. $122,400 $400 in misappropriated caregiver compensation, plus interest, ordered repaid to Meg's trust. Vivian was removed as trustee that same day, and a neutral professional fiduciary was appointed in her place. A stranger who answered to a court and not to a family. Adult Protective Services substantiated the financial exploitation. That is a written finding on government letterhead that I was right and she was not, which is the exact kind of paper she had once used against me. Now pointed the other way, and there was a smaller, quieter finding inside the larger one that I have always treasured. When the investigator contacted the consultant who had written the 11-page assessment, the man who had declared me neglectful, he confirmed in writing, under his own signature this time, that he had been physically present in the home on exactly 2 occasions for a combined total of under 1 hour. He had written 11 pages. About 9 years he never saw. He put that in writing because he was finally afraid of being on the wrong side of a record. Funny how everyone remembers the value of the truth the moment the paperwork turns serious. And the Attorney General's office took an interest in Marsh Hollow and the undisclosed ownership and the steering of vulnerable adults into a facility a trustee's husband profited from. I do not control that part, and I never tried to. I only handed them the thread. What they pulled is theirs. The family chat went through the reversal. These things always go through once the paper turns. Priya told me later that once the witnesses to the real story started talking, once the court findings were undeniable, the relatives who had lined up to call me neglectful got very quiet and then began sending the sideways, half-swallowed apologies that people send when they cannot quite form the word sorry. I accepted them and let them go. Carrying grudges is heavy, and I had an old woman's hands to keep soft. And Theo changed in the one way that mattered, which is late, but real. He read the court filings. He saw, in numbered paragraphs, what his sister had built and what I had quietly endured. And something in him that had spent 40 years folded up finally stood. He stopped translating Vivian into someone kinder than she was. When she called him to test whether blood would bend him back, he held the line every time, without my asking. It turned out the man I married had a spine. The whole time, he had just spent his whole life being told to keep it folded for the sake of peace. We are, slowly, finding our way back. I am not promising you a reunion. I am telling you the truth, which is messier and better. But none of that is the ending. This is the professional fiduciary the court appointed had one early job, which was to review Meg's complete file and figure out what Meg had actually wanted before anyone rewrote her. And in doing it, she found something Vivian had buried and forgotten, because Vivian had never imagined anyone would look. Years before the forged amendment, on one of her clear afternoons, Meg had gone with Delphine, the same elder law attorney I would later hire by pure unrelated luck. No, I will be honest, not luck. It is a small town and there are only 3 of them, and that is exactly the kind of plain truth these stories should tell instead of pretending the universe conspires. Meg had gone in and recorded a short video statement of her wishes, the way careful lawyers have careful clients do, so that a person's voice survives the fog that is coming for it. They found the video, and the fiduciary, because it was relevant and proper. Let me see it. It is 90 seconds long. Meg is in a cardigan. I remember. She is clear-eyed, the way she used to be, and she says, looking right into the camera, that the house on Linden Street is to go to Nora, my son's wife. the only one who actually stayed and did the work, no matter what anyone says later. And someone will try to say something later. I know my family. She holds up her hand. There is a brass key in it, on a green ribbon. I already gave her the key, Meg says, and she almost laughs. Tell them. I meant it. I watched it alone, and yes, I let myself feel it. But I had already used my one cry months before at the kitchen table, and a promise is not a wound. So I just sat very still and let an old woman reach across 2 years of fog to hand me, on purpose, in her own voice, the thing her daughter had tried to forge away. Meg passed last spring, peacefully, in a good facility. Not Marsh Hollow, with her hands soft, because I never stopped bringing the cream. I did not, in the end, keep the house. I want to tell you that plainly, because I think you are expecting me to move into it and win. And that is not what happened. And it is not what mattered. The court honored Meg's wishes and the house came to me. And then I sold it. And I put most of what it brought into a fund, in Meg's name, that helps pay family caregivers. The invisible ones, the ones who are assumed, the unpaid daughters and sons and in-laws who give years and are handed a bill. Vivian's stolen $122,000, returned to the trust, flowed into that fund too. Which means the money she paid herself to not care for Meg now pays strangers to actually care for someone else's Meg. I find that I can live with the symmetry. I kept 3 things from that house. The lavender hand cream, which I have never thrown out. The blue spiral notebook, which sits on my desk at work now. Not as evidence anymore, but as a reminder of what it is for. And the brass key on the green ribbon, which I do not need to open any door, because the house is sold and gone. But which means something different now than it did the day Meg tied it. It used to mean a promise about a house. Now it means I was the one who stayed. It is the smallest, lightest object I own, and it is the heaviest proof I have ever held that a woman in the fog, on her last clear afternoon, knew exactly who I was. Even on the days the rest of them decided I was no one. A few weeks ago, on an ordinary Sunday, I made tea at 4 o'clock out of pure habit, the way I did for 9 years. And for a second, the old grief came up, the empty house, the stripped bed, and then I just drank the tea in my own quiet kitchen, with the key on its ribbon hanging from the lamp where I keep it now. Nobody to medicate, nobody to defend her from. Just a warm cup and a soft pair of hands that no longer ache from holding everything up. That is my story. One forged page, one cheap notebook, one old woman who knew who actually stayed. If a family ever decided who you were and then handed you the bill for it, let this be your reminder tonight. You are not the version they wrote of. You never were. And the truth, if you write it down and keep it, is patient, and it will wait for you exactly as long as you need. If that was you, if you were ever the one who did the work and got erased from the story, comment the word stayed below. Just that one word, so I know how many of us there are. There are more of us than they ever counted. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who is carrying a house on their back right now and thinks no one sees them. Tell them someone does. Drop a comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one, here at Still Waters, where the quiet ones get the last word, and the receipts do the talking.